Thank you so much. Thank you. Please. Please. Please, no need to stand. Please sit down. First of all, I just want to say a couple things about our host tonight. First, Kenny. I've known Kenny since he was yay high, and he's a terrific guy. And I remember when he first came to me and said he wanted to get in politics, and I said that's awesome. But I think he said there hasn't been a Democrat since President Garfield in Whitpen. I don't know if that's actually true, but it could be. That you don't know. So so I was like, okay, well look, maybe you don't win the first time, but you get out there, you get some experience. But he did win the first time. He worked very hard, and he's been a terrific supervisor here. He's again a longtime friend, and it's wonderful that he and Carolyn can be here tonight. I also just want to say a word about Melissa. Melissa and I served together in the House, and we weren't, always on the same side of every issue. But I will tell you, there's been no one at the time or since that I had more fun with, and just really miss her in the legislature. And she was always just knew her stuff, and she's been a terrific public servant. And I'm grateful that you're here tonight as well. And I hope you don't get in trouble with your party elders as a result of that.
You know me. To my own drop.
There you go. And ask a really aggressive question. That'll make them feel better. Okay. Just a little housekeeping. I'm wired, and I am being filmed because this is going to be available on PCN or whatever. First of all, he's filming. It's only one camera, so it's the back of your heads. Okay, so unless you have like a Voldemort situation going on, people won't see your face. And when you ask a question at the mic, it'll still be the back of your head. So if you don't want to, you don't have to identify yourself, or you can use a pseudonym. Okay, I use Dutch LaRue. That's what I use when I want. So long story. But mostly what I'd like to do is answer questions tonight on anything. If I know the answer, that's great. If I don't, I will feign knowledge. If that doesn't go over, then I will try to get you an answer. I would just like to just touch on a couple issues initially by way of intro, and then take your questions. So please think of something good. Kenny mentioned the medical marijuana. I just want to touch on that. That was signed by the governor last April, it is. For those who don't know the details of it, just very briefly, the highlights of the details of it is it creates a protocol for medical cannabis throughout the state of Pennsylvania. It allows for 50 licenses for dispensaries. A dispensary license allows you to open 3 individual dispensaries, so you're allowed to, theoretically, there'll be 150 of those types. There's another type I'll get to of dispensaries around the state, and 25 grow licenses. So that'll be a grow and processing facility also around the state. They're divided up by region in terms of there has to be a certain amount in each region. We drafted the regulations, and they are out. The last ones came out a couple days ago. And I think it's really, I go to conferences on this issue to learn more about it in Washington and Pittsburgh and California and Nevada. People around the country are saying Pennsylvania has the best protocol in the country. Many people say that for a medical protocol. We have 17 conditions that it is eligible for, and those include, cancer and neuromuscular diseases and post-traumatic stress disorder, glaucoma and a bunch of other things. And then also includes pain, chronic pain. One of the benefits of this, and there are many, but one of them is states with a medical marijuana protocol have a 25% lower rate of opioid addiction. There's just a big CNN article on a study that just came out recently about that. Think about that, 25%. We have an opioid crisis in this state that is unbelievable. There's a lot of reasons for it, but we are flooding our state with opioids. I spoke to a mayor of a town. I think the town had like 40,000 people in it, and there was prescriptions in that town for like 1.3 million pills. Okay, it's just unbelievable. And so what happens is people get addicted. These are highly addictive. People get addicted and then their prescriptions run out. And so they need to continue to get opioids, but they don't have access to pharmaceuticals anymore. So then we see a lot of people turning to things, street drugs, heroin, fentanyl, and fentanyl is just a nightmare. It's so much more powerful than heroin. People don't know how to use it, and people are dying all over the place. If we can reduce that by 25%, and I'm hoping we can do more, and there's other things we can do as well, I mean, we have 2,000 people last year who died from this, okay? That's be 500 lives saved, which would be just on the opioid side of it. There are also, you know, a lot of lives are going to be saved as a direct result of this. We had one woman who now works for the Department of Health, who was one of our leading moms who helped fight for this. And she has a daughter who was seizing well over 100 times a day, every day. And you know, she did not know when she put her daughter to bed whether or not the daughter was going to wake up in the morning. It was a horrible way to live. Since she has been on it, because there's a safe harbor provision now that allows children to use it, since her child has been using it, her child is now almost completely seizure-free. So it's been miraculous for her, miraculous for a lot of pain patients, post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's going to help a lot of people. But beyond that, it's going to be a huge new industry in Pennsylvania. I go to these conferences, and there's these huge exhibit halls with all these bizarre machines and extruders and clippers. And like, you know, this is I don't know where all this comes from, but it's amazing. Tracking systems and testing systems and all kinds of soil products. I mean, a lot of new industries are going to be born as a result of this. So the first licenses are going to be awarded in about 10 days. Well, the first round, there's 2 rounds, the first round. Now, I can tell you we received almost 600 applications for the 27 dispensaries and 12 grow licenses that we are giving out in a couple of weeks. That's a lot of people. And it's interesting, it's kind of interesting because I have no power to decide who gets a license at all. That is the Department of Health. These are scored. We came up with a point system. They're scored by 3 different people, each application separately. And so it is, and then it's going to be done through the objective process of the scores. I have no ability to do that. But people don't believe me when I tell them that. So I've been invited to go out to dinner like a whole lot, which I am certainly up for. And so, but I imagine some of the people who bought me dinner might be upset when they don't get their license. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But anyway, dispensaries should start opening sometime around April. And you will have to go to a certified doctor. Doctors become certified by taking a 4-hour course. It's and then they can recommend, and the Department of Health gives you a card and all of that. So we will have every form of it, I'm hoping, by then. You know, I think this will do a lot of good. Another issue I've been working on, and we passed some good legislation, and we're this close. Yes?
Before you move on to something
Yeah, yeah.
else, may I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
About the marijuana. What is to prevent the sales of marijuana being taken over by the big pharmaceutical companies?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The state law will not allow that because they will not have licenses. However, there's an irony and to this, which is that one of the things that the activists on this issue want to see is the federal government. The federal government currently calls marijuana a Schedule I narcotic, which prevents all kinds of things, all kinds of testing, makes it harder, and prevents banking of certain types. It's a real impediment. The problem is, I mean, so everyone wants it either moved to a Schedule III or delisted entirely. The only downside to that, or the only complicating factor, is if you do that, then CVS can start selling it, and Rite Aid, and whoever else. So that impacts the value of the licenses. And so it is a complicated issue. My guess is, given the current administration, we're not going to see much action on the federal front in a positive way in the near term. That we don't have to face that, but the law does not, you can't sell it, a pharmaceutical company can't sell it in Pennsylvania. So that is the way it is. Yes?
Is there anything to prevent a pharmaceutical company from buying up companies that hold these licenses?
Well, I mean, the pharmaceutical company, first of all, I don't think they can legally as a Schedule I narcotic now. If it's delisted, that changes everything. But under current law, that will not happen. Of course, Schedule I also prevents insurance companies from covering it. So there's going to be, we've tried to set up a lot of charitable protocols to allow people who can't afford their medication to get it. But that's, you know, that's dicey because it's, the demand's always going to exceed the supply of charity. So we're going to have to see how that plays out as well. But so the other issue, second, and again, feel free to interrupt me anytime with a question you have, that's great. Another issue that I've been working on, that so a woman a couple of years ago came into my office to talk about human trafficking. And I was like, well, I'm against that because, you know, I'm brave that way. You know, it wasn't a, I mean, you know, I didn't really know that much about it. It wasn't a front burner issue for me. And, you know, I was like, okay, as a person here wants to meet about, okay, fine. So I met, and it changed my life. It was a woman named Julie Janofsky who was, worked for something called the Polaris Project, which is an organization that rescues and services victims of human trafficking. And I had no idea the pervasiveness of this. This is the second most common crime in the world after drug trafficking. And the ubiquitousness of this. This is happening in Whitpain. This is happening in Upper Merion. This is happening all over the place. And there's different types. There's labor trafficking, and there's sex trafficking. I was just floored when I heard all this, and I was like, okay, what can I do to help? And so we started meeting and coming up, because Pennsylvania was considered the least progressive state in the nation in terms of dealing with human trafficking. You know, I mean, we're number one. I mean, at least, you know, on something. So we decided to, we passed two really important bills. One is a posting bill, which requires restaurants, hotels, bars, nail salons, other places that victims of human trafficking might be, to post the number of the Polaris Project and how you can be rescued. And we know that that's worked. A lot of people have been rescued because we've heard from them in our office, and that's really great. We also passed a second sort of comprehensive bill, which provided money for services, increased penalties to traffickers, money for training for police officers and school teachers and others to recognize the signs of trafficking, and all of that. So that passed as well, and we were very, Stuart Greenleaf and I partnered to do that. And it moved Pennsylvania way to the front in terms of dealing with human trafficking. There's a third bill that I've introduced that we passed a version of in the Senate last week or 2 weeks ago. It is the most controversial. And I'm just warning Melissa because it's the DAs. And she's a former DA. So I just, you know, and if there's any DAs in here, we love DAs. But most of them, I mean, most of them are great. Every once in a while there's a DA, I feel like they look out the window and they see people walking free and it makes them sad. It's not Melissa. So, all right, so this is what the Safe Harbor Bill says. It says, we can no longer charge underage people who are arrested for prostitution with that crime. Why? Because, first of all, the average age at which a girl in America gets exposed to prostitution, who becomes a prostitute, is 13 years old. Okay? My daughter is now 16. I mean, it just blows my mind. I still, you know, don't watch R-rated movies with her because it freaks me out. But, I mean, she came down the other night. We're watching The Crying Game. Anyone ever see that? It's... boy, that was awkward. Anyway, so you know, very few 15-year-old, it's mostly girls, there are some boys, but it's mostly girls. Very few 15-year-old girls, you know, have gone through all the career options and decided street walking is the one for them, right? That they are almost always there because they were threatened or beaten, or someone they cared about was threatened or beaten. Someone told me a story in one of our meetings of a girl who ran away from home, got in with some guy who was going to be her boyfriend, and then he tried to put her out on the street, and she refused, and he beat her up, and she still refused. And that takes a lot of courage for a young girl. So he bought her a dog, and she became very attached to this dog, and he started viciously beating the dog. and then she went out on the street. You know, I mean, these are the quality of people we're talking about. So anyway, the bill would say that you can't charge them. And I think, legally speaking, I don't know how we charge them, because under the law, under federal and state law, they are considered victims. So how do you charge? And under state law, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a woman or a girl under 16 cannot consent to sex with an adult under any circumstances. Okay? So how can you be charged with a crime for something you cannot legally consent to? And so I want to eliminate that. Now, some people, we got some pushback from the DA Association. Some argued that some people really do make this choice, and we shouldn't let them get away with it. I thought that was not a great argument. The other one, I thought the better argument, but still failing to me, is the argument that, well, we need this hammer to be able to force them to get services, or to testify against their trafficker, or to, whatever it is. And I just think we don't charge people with crimes to coerce them for that. I mean, there are adult victims of domestic violence who refuse to testify against their perpetrator, in fact, go back to him. He loves me, he said he was sorry. So they go back. All right, that's very frustrating. I used to do some of these cases and in the PFA context, and it's frustrating. But that's their choice. We don't then arrest them and charge them with the crime. I think the criminal justice system should be used for some very specific purposes and limited purposes, and this is not one of those purposes. So anyway, we passed a watered-down version of the bill in the Senate, which was better. It made a big step in the right direction, and it didn't go quite as far as I wanted it to. But then I'm hearing that the House may not even run that. The House is harder on a lot of these issues. So if that happens, I am filing a lawsuit to have the bill, to have the law as applied to juveniles declared unconstitutional, based on the fact that you can't charge with you have to have some element of mens rea, which is a criminal intent, and you can't charge someone with something that they have to intend to do when they can't legally intend to do it. So, and there's a couple other arguments as well. I have filed 2 other lawsuits since I've been in the legislature. No, I filed 3 others. But 2 of them were successful. Got voter ID struck down. Hey, thank you. And something called Act 192, which allowed the NRA to sue any municipality that not only passes a gun ordinance, but even hopes to, even wishes, because a resolution could get you sued. And a resolution is nothing more than a wish for something to happen in the future. And there's obvious First Amendment issues, but that's not the basis on which we won the suit. But we got that struck down as well. They're trying to revive that, but so far have been unable to do it. So I'm a believer in using the courts to do that. Another thing that I was contemplating and starting to gather research to challenge in court was civil asset forfeiture, which I think is one of the great injustices. For those who don't know, civil asset forfeiture, they take your property because they claim it's an instrumentality of a crime. But they don't have to prove that, and they don't have to charge you with anything. They just take it. And then you can file a petition to get it back, saying you're an innocent owner. You can hire a lawyer. You can go to court. But that shouldn't be, they should have to prove you've done something wrong before you can take your property. Not only should they have to prove you did something wrong, but the second part of that is true too. They should have to prove you did something wrong before they take your property, and then there's a hearing if there's a petition filed. Okay? Usually, if I sue you, if you hit me with your car and I sue you and say you were negligent, I don't get any money until I win the lawsuit, okay? But not in this case. But there's they get the money first. And when I say they, that creates a bigger problem because law enforcement gets the money. And it is an obvious conflict of interest. I mean, let me put it this way. Let's say I were a judge and Kenny had committed some violation of something. And I said, Mr. Wallman, I find you guilty of this thing. I'm going to fine you $5,000, make the check out to Daylin Leach. You'd be like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. But some DA's offices, 25% of their budget is forfeited assets. So doesn't that give them an incentive to take your stuff? And so I said I was going to file a lawsuit. Now I'm reconsidering because last week the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania issued a ruling greatly reeling in. There was a 71-year-old woman, her son or grandson. Her grandson sold weed out of her window or something like that. He was staying at her house, sold some weed to a friend outside of the house, and they took the house. Yeah, and so the court said, first of all, there has to be some proportionality, which is another problem with the law. It was $40 worth of weed. They took whatever it was, a $75,000 house, right? And and they did some other things too. And it was a unanimous decision, bipartisan unanimous decision, reeling that in. And other states are getting rid of this too. And even Clarence Thomas, and I've got to tell you, I do not always agree with Clarence Thomas. In fact, I can't remember the last issue on which I've agreed with Clarence Thomas. He just wrote a concurring opinion in a case saying that he thinks civil asset forfeiture is unconstitutional. And he's not a great civil libertarian. That's another issue. There's a lot of other criminal justice reform that we're working on because the criminal justice situation is very expensive, if nothing else. It costs about $41,000 a year is the latest estimate to keep someone in jail for a year in Pennsylvania. So it's a lot of money. And at the end of the day, it's a government program. And that's why we see even deep red states starting to do major, what some would consider liberal reforms years ago. For example, Nebraska and Utah, both very red states, fully controlled by Republicans, recently both voted in their legislatures to eliminate the death penalty. Why? Because they're squishy? No, because it was just costing too much money. I mean, in Pennsylvania, it's probably cost well over $1 billion just to have a death penalty since we reinstated it. Do you know the last time we executed someone who did not ask to be executed? Melissa probably knows this. Anyone else? Does anyone know this? What's that? No, Hynek asked to be executed. In other words, he said, I'm dropping my appeals. I want you to kill me. And we've executed 3 people under those circumstances. Who was the last person who said, no thanks to the execution that we executed? Not the name of the person. Anyone know the year? Take a guess.
In the 70s, wasn't it?
Nope. 1962. It has been 55 years since we've actually used the death penalty in Pennsylvania involuntarily. And it's cost us, so at the end of the day, you've got to wonder, putting aside your moral feelings of the death penalty or your feelings about whether it's an appropriate retribution or whatever theory you have, just if nothing else, just can we afford that? Yes, Shelley, you have a question?
Well, I have a question. I don't know if you want to address it now or after you're finished with this, but in the same vein, I know that the House, I believe, just passed legislation for mandatory sentencing.
Yes, I will get to that.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
We're talking about a justice system. Yeah, I want to know.
Okay, I'm going to give you my favorite criminal justice reform, and then we'll talk about the mandatory minimum. My favorite, because I think it's the most important, I don't know, but in many ways the most important, I have a bill which would eliminate, in most cases, with exceptions for some violent crimes, would eliminate pretrial detention for failure to make bail. Okay? Because right now, bail is a way of warehousing poor people. If I'm arrested tonight for anything short of a major felony, let's say I steal a car, or let's say I'm, whatever, I'm shoplifting, or I whatever it is, I will be home either tonight or tomorrow morning, okay, depending what time I get arrested tonight. I will post bail and I will go home and wait trial. But if I have no money, I will go and sit in jail for 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 months awaiting trial, okay? And in that time, I'm likely to lose my family, my home, my job, my life in many cases. There have been some states and cities that have done this. They have the same rate of people showing up for their hearing as we do. Now, bail's never meant to punish people. Bail's meant to ensure appearance. But we are using it to, 65% of people in Philadelphia jail are in jail for failure to make bail, not because they've been convicted of anything. And if you ever want someone who's far more eloquent, I don't actually believe that, but I'm told I have to work on my humbleness. But if you ever want to hear a really good, funny explanation of the bail system and the alternatives to it, John Oliver, just go to YouTube, John Oliver Bail. He does like a 20-minute thing on the whole thing. And, of course, there's all the studies. African Americans nationwide are given higher bail than white offenders for the same crime, etc. There's a lot of problems, and we've got to stop warehousing people for that. Yes?
On the same topic, I know that in many districts, someone gets arrested and they might have served whatever time it is, and then they're given a bill, they owe money for being warehoused in a prison. Now, and they work out a payment plan. Now, that doesn't seem fair. And besides, they're so poor, many of them are so poor, and what the problem is, if they don't meet that payment plan, they're put back in jail.
Yeah. And that's one of the things. Well, and we passed the Justice Reinvestment Act a couple years ago, and that actually, some of the issues, those issues were meant to be addressed by that. One of the things it did was, for example, we used to have, when I was practicing law, you would be released on parole or probation, or or early from your sentence. And if you committed a violation of parole, you would be sentenced to finish the term of your sentence. But often these were what they call technical violations, failure to report a new phone number or something like that. And people were sent back to jail for stuff like that. We're trying to get away from that and only send people back to jail if they commit new crimes or something like that. Do you see what I'm saying? We're trying to get away from, finding technical reasons and small reasons to incarcerate people. Yeah. Well, now in terms of that, yeah, I mean that goes to a broader issue of the idea of repaying the cost to society of putting you in jail, and there's a legitimacy to that. But we shouldn't use it to increase the cost to society by keeping you in jail longer. That's sort of a catch-22. So anyway, the bail thing is really important. On the mandatory minimum, it's a bill in the House by Todd Stevens, who's a very nice guy and a friend of mine. We I think, disagree on this issue. I believe, let me start with this. When I was, in the 15 years I've been in the legislature, I've received hundreds of co-sponsorship memos asking me to sign on to increase the penalty for this crime or that crime, or impose a new mandatory minimum, or increase the mandatory minimum, or whatever it is. I don't think I've ever received a co-sponsorship memo asking me to reduce the sentence or the punishment for a crime. So there is a ratcheting up over time, and I've seen it because if you're there for 15 years, I always just make up a crime. Grave robbing. Okay, so let's say grave robbing. Penalty, year in jail, let's just say. There'll be a co-sponsorship memo to raise it to 2 years, right? And I'm like, okay, what is, like in caucus, I'll say, is there some empirical data that increasing it to 2 years will result in fewer grave robberies? And I'm sorry. No, there almost never is. But often it's like, well, I had a situation in my district, the sponsor will say, and this is, by the way, just as a general rule, this is not always the case, but as a general rule, whenever a bill is named after somebody, Melissa's Law or Ken's Law, it's always a bad idea, okay? Almost always a bad idea, because it's usually, what's that? Except for, I said, not in every case. But there's a lot there. Larry, I won't mention name. Someone had a bill, someone hit a horse or something, a police horse, and we're going to have Trigger's Law. I don't know what it was. But look, we often overreact to sensational things, including, I remember during the Rendell administration, we had one guy who was out on parole and did something bad. So there was no parole for years. Remember that? I mean, that's not smart thinking, I think, okay? The mandatory minimum, we've gotten away from mandatory minimums. in the Senate. Stuart Greenleaf and I, bipartisan way, and God, I hope Stuart lives forever because I don't know who's going to replace him on judiciary. But he's a very reasonable person, and he was a sponsor of many of these mandatory minimums. He's had a complete change of heart, and he said they don't work, and all they do is, and this is the problem with mandatory minimums. You and I might commit the same crime for totally different reasons, totally different intent, totally different backgrounds. Every case is different. Every defendant is different. And you talk to any judge, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. They will tell you they've had cases where they have been forced to sentence to someone that they are not comfortable. They're like, this is an injustice, and I'm being forced to do this. All right, I would prefer a judge to hear a case, learn everything there is relevant about the case, and then impose a sentence that makes sense within a range. Okay, but the mandatory minimums, and then we hear, and I think Todd's make this argument, well, mandatory minimums we need because they're effective at getting people to plead guilty. And again, having a draconian sentence hanging over someone's head to force them to give up their constitutional right to a trial is troubling to me. I do not support that bill. And I don't think that bill is going to move in the Senate. And I don't think the governor would sign it. But I do think that, at the federal level, the Attorney General is going back to this idea of lock them all up for as long as possible and all of that.
I know.
You might be subject to that.
Well, yeah, that's all. That's a different issue.
Montgomery County DA is supporting it.
What's that?
Montgomery County.
Well, DAs tend to do that. No offense, but I mean that's their sort of they're fighting for the tools that will make their job easier, and we all do that. But I think it also gives way too much. I mean, it's supposed to be an adversarial process, and in many ways, it's not. In the sense that we give, I think, DAs too much power. I'm so sorry. I love you. You know I love you. But we give.
Domestic violence.
Okay. All right. No, we give DAs too, because keep in mind the decision to charge a mandatory minimum offense is a DA's decision. The decision to drop that charge is a DA's decision. The judge doesn't make that decision. They already have, like for example, if I were a defense lawyer and I said to Ken, I will give you $10,000 if you testify that my client wasn't at the scene of the crime. I just committed a crime myself. I can go to jail for that. But a DA could say, Ken, I know you have a drug charge outstanding. We can make that go away if you'll testify that the guy was at the scene of the crime. That's perfectly legal. You can offer something of value to a witness as a DA. You cannot as a defense lawyer. So there's a lot of other things that I think could be changed to make it a more fair and adversarial system. That's not to say, I mean, look, this is not a proposal to set everyone free. There are definitely people who should not be free. And I think there are way too many people in prison. And I think, for example, treating addiction as a crime rather than as a disease is a wrong approach, and it's costing us a ton of money and it's ruining lives. But obviously violent people, predatory people, people who are repeat and dangerous property crime offenders, obviously you want to keep, but keep it, this is important to remember. America has, depending on which study, between the first and the second most people per capita incarcerated in the world. Pennsylvania has the second most people per capita incarcerated in the country. So Pennsylvania in the world we're incarcerating like more people than Kim Jong-un, and that's saying something. So I'm, his trials are not quite as, they're even less adversarial. But all I'm saying is that maybe this mass incarceration is not, maybe there's a better approach. And so that's one of the things I'm working on. There's a lot of other things as well. Just had a press conference yesterday on food shaming, which sounds like an obscure issue, but there's almost nothing that makes me madder than that. That's where we've had a bunch of situations where kids were shamed at school because their parents did not pay enough for their lunches. And we had one cafeteria worker at the press conference say a first grade boy came up to her with a tray and ring it up, didn't have enough money in his account, and her supervisor said, take it away from him, don't give it to him. And she refused, and she was fired. And I told my own story of food shaming when I was a kid, similarly. I don't want to tell it now because I get, you know, we all have our little childhood scars, don't we? But it's on my Facebook page. You can look at it. You can watch me struggle through the story there. But and my Twitter. But there was another parent there whose child was sent home with a big "no money" written in Sharpie on the arm. I mean, really. So we're trying to ban food shaming. Kids should not be denied food, and it should not be communicated with at all. You want to sue the parents, you want to communicate with the parents, fine. But do not, the kids do not know at all and should not be involved at all. And there's another school that they were like, if you don't have enough money, when I was a kid, I won't get into the whole story, but when I was a kid, there was no cards, there was no accounts. You had to just bring, at the time, 35 cents. If you didn't have 35 cents, you didn't eat. Simple as that. But now, there is a protocol in some schools that if you don't have enough money, you don't get your hot lunch, but you get a cold cheese sandwich. But the cold cheese, putting aside the Epicurean disadvantages of a cold cheese sandwiches, it is, you know, everyone can see who has them. Okay, and you know how kids are. Okay, I mean, my last name was Leach. I can tell you how the kids are. So. You know, that's something we're dealing with. And of course, we're dealing with the budget now, which is a broad topic. You know, the one thing, I'm just going to tell you the one thing that really bothers me about budgets, and both parties and legislatures of both parties have done this, and it drives me crazy. There's a lot of things you can argue about in the budget. But the one thing that really bothers me, and we see it now on the federal level too, which is the assumption conundrum. Is that catchy? But basically what it says is we have a hole in the budget. We don't like to raise taxes, and so how are we going to fill a $400 hole? Let's assume something will fill it. For example, last year we assumed that the new gaming bill would fill a several $100 million hole in the budget, and we put that in. Because we have to pass a balanced budget, okay? We're required constitutionally to do that. So you do that, you assume, and part of the spreadsheet is $400 million from this gaming bill. We just neglected to pass the gaming bill, okay? So, you know, and I think the federal budget balances because they assume like, I don't know, 6% economic growth, which hasn't happened, I don't think, since, you know, President Benjamin Harrison, which also is not necessarily true, but you don't know. You know, you just can't assume away things. You have to, you know, actually be honest about budgeting, and we have to work on that. But I'd be happy to talk about details of budgeting. There's a pension bill that we just passed that I don't like. It's complex, but I'd be happy to get into the weeds if anyone wants to talk about that. Environmental issues, you know, Hawaii today became the first state. The governor signed a law agreeing to abide by the Paris Protocol. Yeah. Right, you know you're not in Hawaii, right? It's okay. Which you were, and I was last summer. It was awesome. Yes, in the back. Well, first of all, Tom Wolf will not be able to sign a law because the legislature is different than Hawaii. So I guess we could be aspirational about it, and I mean, we could come out and speak in favor of that. I certainly would do that. I mean, keep in mind it would be non-binding, so we would be basically encouraging companies to do that, and you know, hopefully we will. I'm extremely troubled, and I'm not here to. I mean, I'll talk about whatever you want, but you know, my portfolio at the current moment is not national issues, and so you know. But I just want to say that to me, the issue of climate change is a frightening thing. I mean, if you read the actual scholarship by scientists, we have already passed a number of points of no return. We've already passed a number of tipping points. We already see the consequences, in chunks of ice the size of Virginia falling off the ice shelf in Antarctica and all this other stuff. The projections of coastal flooding. I mean, have you seen these? The projections of flooding, 50 years from now include much of New York City, okay, much of Miami, much of, most of our cities. A lot of our cities are on the coast because, they're nice views and there's water nearby. So it is a really important issue, and we need an aggressive approach, and we are literally just going the completely opposite way. And I think that we have to think about what we can do about that in our own lives, in our state, et cetera, because this is not going to go away. I'm sorry, some hands. Ron, 2, 3.
I'm Ron Stoll from the Wissahickon School Board, and you mentioned pensions. The Wissahickon School District and every school district across the entire state is getting killed by the taxes we have to pay on our salaries to make up for 15 years of doing nothing. Is there any move to in the legislature to soften that blow on not only the school district, obviously, but our taxpayers?
Yeah, we passed the pension bill. I voted no. It was 40-9, but it passed the Senate. It may or may not pass the House. There's a lot of political considerations now, different people running for a governor or whatever, that play into this. I hope I'm not destroying anyone's illusions by saying that. But the bill that was passed will do nothing for you. One of the reasons I voted no. It creates these hybrid, without getting too into the weeds and too technical, this is the issue. There is a pension plan now for state retirees and school retirees. We were very generous with that pension in 2000, I think 2001, and because the stock market was going great and that our funds were going like this, and we thought it would last forever. And when I say we, I would just note this was Act 9, which dramatically increased things, and neither I nor Melissa were there. Not our fault. Many things could be our fault, not that. All right, and so so then the stock market, didn't do as well, and so we started having a shortfall. So what do we do about the shortfall? Well, one of the leading suggestions is we switch from a defined benefit plan where you know what your benefit is. They send you a statement. If you retire at this age, this is how much you'll get per month. That's defined benefit. To a defined contribution plan, which is this is how much you pay every month, and you get what you get. I mean, it's a 401k. If the stock market's doing well and stuff, you do well. If it's doing poorly, you do poorly. Good luck to you, okay? Those are the two plans. Now, there's two problems with switching from defined benefit to defined contribution, because defined contribution theoretically could be cheaper. We're not on the hook. If the stock market does badly, we don't have to pay the benefit anyway, so we would save money. But there are two problems. First of all, we wouldn't save money for a long time because we can't switch already working employees because they signed up under a defined benefit plan. It's a contract. They could sue us, and the Supreme Court of several states have upheld that. They could sue us and get the money from us. We can't break that promise. So we can only go from the day the bill becomes a law. From that day forward, new employees could be put in that plan. There's two problems with that. Number one, the new employees that you're hiring, if you're hiring someone on, let's say tomorrow's Thursday, we're hiring someone tomorrow, they're probably not retiring Friday. They're probably retiring in 30 or 40 years. So you don't start saving money on them until 30 or 40 years from now, number one. Number two problem is that under the current defined benefit plan, I'm still working. So I am paying into this fund, which is paying current retirees. It's almost Ponzi scheme-ish, but that's the way it is, right? So current workers are funding retirees. If we switch to a 401k type of system, my money doesn't go into a fund. It goes to my specific account, and no one else can touch it. But that means no one's paying the retirees. So there is a huge transition cost, which is why some states went from defined benefit to defined contribution and then switched back because they couldn't afford it. Because you just have to raise taxes or some other way come up to pay for current retirees. And keep in mind, saying, well, we're going to say, don't worry about it, in 30 years things are going to be awesome, doesn't sell politically, okay? Because most people think in 30 years their circumstances will be different. So, what we try to do is sort of split the baby and say that you can have a half of a defined contribution and half of a defined benefit plan and this, but the bottom line, again, it's complicated, but the bottom line is its supporters say it'll save $15 billion over 10 years, which is controversial, but even that, it's not that much money, I mean, in terms of the grand scheme of things. And then there are still transition costs which are not paid for in the bill. And frankly, to me, I believe in defined benefit plans. I believe that worker security when they retire is important. My mother was a teacher, she retired. When she retired, she wants to know what it's important to know what you're going to get. And the one group of people who has done everything they were asked to do under the pension plan are the workers. They've paid every penny that they were supposed to pay. The legislature did not. Sometimes we were like, well, we don't have quite that much money. It'll be fine. Stock market will take. We'll spend it on something else. We didn't meet our contribution obligations and so forth. So it's not their fault. And even the co-sponsorship of the bill, I believe, said this is the greatest risk shift in Pennsylvania history. That's true, but the risk goes to the workers. It's a shift to the workers and the retirees, and I'm not sure that's the best way to go about it. So despite my protestations, it passed, something I'm used to. And but I don't know if the House will pass it or not. We're hearing different things, maybe not, maybe. That's the next 2 weeks, so keep an eye if you're interested in that issue. All right, wait, did I have number 2 and 3? Did everyone? That's you? Yes.
And are there 2 bills that have been introduced, possibly?
I'm one of them. And I like mine the best. I'm just going to, do we have reception here? Where's my crack staff? I just want to show you, for those who don't know what gerrymandering, because some people don't fully get it, what gerrymandering looks like. I just want to get, can you do me a favor? Just
I brought my old legislative district out. I have it on my wall just to remind me of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick a district out of the hat. How about PA7? All right. So, yeah. So, all right. Just real quick. I mean, gerrymandering for those who are not experts, and in other words, for those who have lives. All right, thank you. Good, you have much better Googling skills than I do. All right. Just so you know, I don't know if everyone can see this. This is the 7th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. In red. The red, this one district. I don't know, does that, here. Okay, there you go.
Visions of North Carolina. If I may make a comment, I live round the corner here, and I term it as like a polyp on that particular.
That's a good
Don't
description.
misunderstand me, it's a very nice area. But it's not democratic, because I only found out that it changed the day before the election day. Because no one comes after that little polyp.
Yeah.
They're too busy.
No, the polyps suffer under this. But let me say this. All right, so just a quick primer. The Constitution says that every district has to have about the same number of people. The Supreme Court has actually been quite adamant about that. And so every 10 years we do a census in the 0 year. And then we figure out who lives where. And then in the 1 year, we have to redraw the lines because the population shifts. People move, people are born, people die, towns lose population, towns gain population. We have to shift. That's all fine. The problem is how do we draw those lines? right? And so we allow politicians to draw the lines, which is troubling because, and this is not, I want to be clear, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. Democrats do this in states where they control. Republicans do this in states where they control. In Pennsylvania, the Republicans controlled last time, so let's talk about them. So we have to redraw the lines. So the politicians draw the lines, and it's easy to draw lines to make one result or another more likely. Okay, and you know, again, when I say it's a systemic problem. It's not an individual problem because people, it's just too tempting. If you put me in a room by myself and said, draw a district for yourself, and I can make my life easy or really hard, what am I going to do? You know, I mean, don't put me in that position. I'm sure, because then I'm sure I can rationalize. You know, I'm not gerrymandering. I just like these people like each other, so I'm going to put them together, and whatever. So it's just not. It's not something we should have the power to do because we're going to do that. All right. So we draw these horrible lines, and there are two types of gerrymandering. Just so you know, there's cracking and packing. As everyone, okay. So for those who don't know, I'm sorry if everyone knows this, but. And I would ask if anyone doesn't know this, but then it's like the food shaming thing. I don't want to make so. Cracking is where there's an inconvenient area that you just break apart, so it's not inconvenient anymore. For example, in 2006 in Erie, Erie is a very Democratic area. Kathy Dalkamper won that seat, a Democrat. And then that was upsetting to the Republicans. So they, when they gerrymandered in 2011, they divided Erie in half. Now it's in two different congressional districts. And that is called cracking. Packing is where you take all the members you can find of the other party and you round them up in a few highly, in this case, Democratic districts. And then the rest of them are yours. You know, so for example, even though in the first year after the last most recent gerrymander at the congressional level, Democrats got 91,000 more votes than Republicans statewide for Congress. But the delegation is 13 Republicans, 5 Democrats. Why? Because they took every Democrat they could find and they packed them into 5 districts. And let me give you some specific examples around here so you understand. Jim Gerlach, another nice guy, a Republican from the 6th District, had tight races a couple of times. And so when time to redistrict the 6th District, his two most troubling areas were Lower Merion, which is heavily Democratic, and Norristown, which is overwhelmingly Democratic. So they just, you know, Lower Merion found itself with West Philly in what is now Dwight Evans' district, and Norristown found itself in the 13th, which is now Brendan Boyle's district. Problem solved, right? So this is what happened. Now, the reason this is so awful, everyone understands what this is. So the reason...
It's happening right here in Whitpain is divided, just so people...
You mean locally?
Locally.
Okay.
Divided in the 7th and the 13th.
I'll let you guys work it out with her. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it happens all over the place. This is the problem with it. The obvious problem, and I did a TED Talk on this, which you can watch over and over again. There's no limit. It's on YouTube, TEDx Daylin. There you go. Just ignore a lot of other stuff you see under Daylin. It's not my fault. All right, so anyway, but it's called The Death of Democracy. But so the obvious problem is no competitive elections, unaccountable politicians, blah, blah, blah. That's the obvious problem. But the more subtle but more pernicious problem is the political incentives it creates. Because if I'm a Democrat and Melissa's a Republican and we're both 50-50 districts next to each other, we're not going to get every vote of our party. And also sometimes our party doesn't show up as much as the other party in a particular cycle because of national issues or whatever. So to be secure, I'm going to need some Republican votes. I'm going to need some independent votes. So what is my incentive? It is to be moderate and reasonable and reach across the aisle and talk about how I've worked with Melissa to pass important legislation. So the moderate Republicans and independents in my district like me. And that's how it works. And the same thing for her. Now, let's just draw the lines a little bit around, and then suddenly we both have 70-30 districts in our favor. Well, I'm never going to lose to a Republican. She's never going to lose to a Democrat. We have no incentive to appeal to the moderate middle. The only elections we can lose is a primary to a more ideologically extreme person. So her and my incentive is now to be she has to worry about a Tea Party person, right? So now she has to be not only not saying how she worked with Daylin, but like, oh my God, that guy's awful. I would never talk to him. I would never, and that's what her base wants to hear. And that's what she has to worry about. So we see that nationwide, right? And that is why 40 years ago, people would argue, but then they'd go into a room and adults would work something out, right? Now, that doesn't happen. You can't go into a room with the other party, or you're going to get a primary and it's going to be a nightmare. There are PACs now on both sides who raise millions of dollars just for the purpose of taking on members of their own party who are not ideologically pure enough. All right, and that has created incentives which are just, and then it also creates these deep, deep red and deep, deep blue districts where there is no, you feel no pressure to be a normal human being. And so, that is very bad for democracy, is why we can't get things done anymore. And we cannot survive this forever. I mean, there are several things that are driving our democracy into a place where it is no longer going to be functional. Even putting aside the fact that essentially the Russians are deciding who wins the election. I'll tell you how we fix it. My bill. Well, actually, you know what? There's actually a unique opportunity in Pennsylvania right now, because the Republicans controlled the process before, right? In the last election, the Democrats swept on the state level. It's done by a commission. House and Senate majority leaders, two of each party, and a fifth vote picked by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was controlled by Republicans last time, and they had their way. They just literally, we were not relevant to the conversation. But after the 2015 election, when we swept 3 Supreme Court seats, the Democrats will control the fifth vote in redistricting last time. And suddenly, and I'm going to be honest with you, the Republicans some of them have had an epiphany. Maybe this redistricting thing isn't fair, and gerrymandering isn't fair after all. Because literally, if a highly partisan Democrat is appointed, they could just draw 26 safe House Senate seats and 102 safe House seats and take over. All right? And well, yeah, I know. See, the problem is the Democrats have had a similar epiphany, which is that maybe the system isn't so bad after all. But I am not one of those. Even though it might benefit my party in this cycle, I like to think that the sort of imminent destruction of our planet aside, that my kids will live a number of decades, their kids will, and so this is going to be a persistent problem. So I would really like to solve it, and this gives us an opportunity to actually have a bipartisan solution, because both sides have some risk here. Right. And also, we should put the congressional redistricting into that as well. Have a grand bargain, a way of doing it that's fair, and so forth. So whether that happens or not, I mean, election of all the issues, everything's partisan in Harrisburg, but there's nothing more partisan than election legislation. Okay, no one. I mean, it's just not. No one is honest in those debates. It's There are lots of debates about, well, this is good for this, and this will help this, and these poor people over here, and this. But really, if there were thought bubbles above the heads on the floor, what they would say is, well, this will help me win. Well, this is going to make me lose. So, and that's really what this is about. So, but we have a unique opportunity in Pennsylvania. There's another opportunity, which is that the Supreme Court took Pennsylvania's redistricting. Last time they considered political gerrymandering, because we're the worst state in the country, arguably. It was Veith versus Jubileer. It was a 5-4 decision. The four liberals on one side, 4 conservatives on the other, and Anthony Kennedy, as often as the case, is in the middle. And Anthony Kennedy said, there may be districts that are so bad that even I would strike them down, but these are not they. Now you saw the 7th. I mean, there's a lot of districts that look like that. Like, it's sort of like, really, like, how bad do they have, like, how much worse could they get? But there's been a couple of Supreme Court decisions recently, a case in Wisconsin, a case in North Carolina, that indicate the court may be willing to start reining this in a little bit. And so hopefully that's our other option. You know, because frankly, political pressure is the least effective on this issue, because there's a catch-22, and this is it. Usually political pressure works because you make a politician think they might lose if they don't do something. But if with gerrymandering, it's like, well, I'll just draw a better district. I mean, it's like, you know, what, 5% of my voters aren't going to vote for me because I voted for gerrymandering? Well, I'll make a 7% better district. So, like, in other words, you can keep ahead of the outrage. But I will tell you this: I had a gerrymandering town hall just on that topic, like 7 years ago, and I got 30 people to come out, and we had one in the same room a couple weeks ago. And we had 250 people. It is starting to penetrate. This is your vote being stolen. And I'm going to tell you, there's one fact, and I'll move on to another topic with you, sir. Unless I've already called someone else, but I'll get to you. So, what's that? Whoever number 3 is. Well, yeah, I'll get to that. So anyway, let me just give you one fact, and if this doesn't piss you off, then there's something just truly wrong with you in your core, which is this. All right, so it was 13-5 Republican congressional districts, right? So I had my redistricting staff from my caucus and me. We sat down and we said, let's see if we can draw a 13-5 Democratic map. So we drew a 13-5 Democratic map, legal map, compliant with the law, safe districts, 13-5 Democrats, without one person voting differently from a partisan perspective. They'd be voting for different people because they'd be in different districts, but every Democrat, every person who voted Democratic votes Democratic again, Republicans, same thing, and I flipped 8 congressional seats without one vote changing. Now, how relevant are the voters in that situation? You are utterly irrelevant, okay? And the only person who's relevant, or the people who are relevant, are the people with the pen, all right? And I mean, how does that not infuriate you, okay? You know, it's one thing for a politician to run and make all kinds of promises, run all kinds of crazy negative ads that aren't true, but it's another thing to literally just rig the system, all right? And so that it doesn't even matter. You know, that's something we need. Fair Districts PA, I'm involved with them. Lisa Boscola has a bill, I have a bill. At the end of the day, it'll be negotiated different than both of our bills.
But for people here who are interested in it, Fair Districts PA has a ton of information.
Yes, they do. And yeah, so anyway, this gentleman. Oh, number 3? Who did I go? You? Whoever is supposed to speak. Then stand up, speak, rise.
Well, just to go with the gerrymandering, so what
Yeah.
I hear you saying, unless I misunderstood you,
Yeah.
is that we as citizens who are going to vote for you probably in the next election have absolutely
God, I hope so.
no impact at all on this discussion.
Yeah, well, in terms of,
We should just go home and...
no, well, I would say this. There is a theoretical way you would have an impact,
Let's hear it.
which is that if people stop voting in a partisan way and said, even if I'm a Democrat or a Republican, whatever it is, I will not vote for someone who votes for these districts, okay? If you make it a voting issue, all right, and even in a primary, because you know what? Primaries are actually more, in many districts, primaries are more relevant, you know, than I mean, you know, in most districts, the primary is the only thing that matters now. Because the gerrymanders are partisan. They're not usually primary based. There is one exception in Pennsylvania where a congressman wanted certain ethnic group more than another ethnic group for primary purposes. I'm not going to name names, but people can figure it out. I'll tell you later. Anyway, so because they were worried, they were a minority in their district, and they were worried about a primary, so they wanted to become a demographic majority in their district for primary purposes. All right, so anyway, but rarely is gerrymandering about primary. So, you know, and also, you know, there's a great, I think shame is a great thing in politics. I'll tell you the most effective way to deal with the legislature. There's a hierarchy of getting your legislators' attention. You know, the lowest, still not worth nothing, but the lowest is sort of ginned up identical emails. You know, we get 400 emails that are identical. That's not that effective because most people don't even realize they sent them. And so there's that. But the most effective way is in person, in public, with a camera on. Okay? And that's why people are afraid to do town halls, because they're afraid of that sort of dynamic. So, you know, make this an issue you care about. The problem is if we poll today, you know, what are your 10 most important issues that you're going to vote on? Well, the economy, jobs, taxes, immigration, whatever it is, abortion. Gerrymandering is not up there. So, you know, people feel they have a free hand to do whatever they want. And that's got to change. Another topic, anyone? So I can, you know. Oh, yes, you, and then, are you to get, same question?
Well, it's gonna be the same question.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, go.
Okay, my question is, you're always, well, everybody's, not just you, but all legislators are complaining about taxes and not enough income. There are approximately 75 houses that are rented in Evansburg State Park, which has been turned into a gated community because so much access has been cut off that you can't use the park. How much do these people pay for rent in a gated community where they have their own police force, the park rangers? If you get too close, they come and chase you. And the state's paying for all their trash pickup and everything. And who are these people? Who are they related to? Are any of them related to anybody who is an elected or appointed official? Because the only people that can use the park are people that live there. I wanted to go train my dogs, and the state park system says you can train your dog on land that's used for hunting from September 1st to December 31st. State game land says you can train from January 1st to August 31st. So really, the two of them have made it impossible to use it, and there's little or no access.
All right, let me.
If you want to golf, there's plenty of.
All right, let me do this. Let me do this. I don't know the specifics of that situation, so I'm reluctant to comment without knowing everything. We would be happy to look into that. I don't know how much of that is a local issue.
I asked your
but
office 2 years ago. I'm waiting for you to get back to me.
Well, it was a busy winter. But Chad, you see Chad? He is in charge of this.
I saw Charles.
And yeah, Charles, I can't imagine he's still alive. But anyway, Chad is in charge of this, and I promise you he will find out everything there is to know about it as soon as you can. And I'll call the next person, but anyone want to hear a quick amusing story about being related to legislators? So, real quick, I don't know the answer, but Chad will find that out. In my township where I live and represent, there was a person who wanted to, in an abandoned gas station, wanted to open up a strip club. And it was a residential area. There was a lot of pushback on that. Because my luck works this way, the person who wanted to open it was a person named Shannon Leach. And so, you know, there was immediately, we started seeing the letters, you know, Daylin's sister is opening up a strip club. Daylin has a cut of the action. And I had to go before the supervisors in a public televised arena and say, no, I'm not related. I'm not an investor at all. And but that was, you know, I just get lucky that way sometimes. All right, you, yes.
My name's Mel Wolf. I am a resident of Wissahickon School District. And if my grandson wasn't in 4th grade right now, I wouldn't know of the problem. Fortunately, my daughter sent me over the information from the head of the school district,
This is HB 1213. Are you familiar with that?
There-
All right,
Not
I'll
by
go-
number.
All right,
There's 3,600 bills a year, so I can't, numbers aren't.
all right.
Senate Bill 1 was the pension bill, I know that.
Can I,
Yes.
all right. I was rather incensed by it because this involves taxes.
What does it do?
Taxes
Can you,
for everyone. Can I?
sure.
Property tax reductions for commercial properties at the expense of our homeowners. What we're talking about, Wissahickon tax base is 22% commercial.
I think I know what you mean.
The businesses that are in this community that are successful businesses. And it would cost taxpayers greater than $3 million in lost revenue, which they would need to make up. And what's going on is a term referred to as preemption. And there are two people involved in this, Warren Kempf and Mike Turzai of the GOP House. And they put together legislation that wants to preempt our local rules and regulations and tax structure. Now, why do they want to do it? Are they altruistic people? No. Do they have something to grind to do this? Yes. And what they're basically going to do is change the assessment through this bill, change the assessment on large commercial buildings so as to reassess them to a lower tax rate. The community here will lose those taxes, and someone has to make it up or the children will suffer, meaning everyone in here will pay higher real estate taxes to make up this difference. Now, the property assessment is based on dark store theory. This is beautiful. Properties of successful businesses are compared to vacant, unmaintained properties. A windfall for successful large companies that easily have been able to handle their overhead as the price of doing business. That's normal. They expect that. But these two gentlemen are very altruistic. They feel that we don't know how to tax in this area to maintain our school system. Well, why would they do something like that, even though they're not in our community? I will tell you why. Because once they put this law into effect and change our tax structure, the large companies in the area that are affected will see to it that every 2 years when they run for office, they will have tremendous money backing them from these companies to make sure they're reelected. So the only thing these two gentlemen, Kempf and Turzai, care about is reelection. That is their holy grail. They don't care about screwing the schools, students, and the inhabitants who have to take care of that. And this is going on all over the country. This is not unique to this area. And it's one of those things where the people should be out in the streets fighting this.
Well, let me comment on that. That is a House bill, and I have not seen a companion bill in the Senate, and it has not come over from the House. Keep in mind, there are 3,600 bills introduced a year. 200 get a vote. Okay, so most things lie in quiet repose in committee until the end of session. So I wouldn't panic about it until we saw some movement on it. And I don't know all the details because it's a House bill, and I just can't. There's too many Senate bills to follow, let alone House bills. But I will tell you this. Along the same lines, there is a Senate bill that has demonstrated some ability to move. It's been through one committee recently, and it's an appropriations committee. It may move, which does something similar, which is shift the burden of taxation from businesses to residents in property taxes. And what the bill does, it says that a school district cannot appeal the assessment of a property. A homeowner can, or a business owner can, a property owner can, but a school district cannot, even based on actual sale. I mean, if you want to know what a property is worth, you would think actual sale price is a pretty good indicator. That's someone was willing to pay that, right? And some of these assessments are decades old, so they're no longer remotely relevant to today, and you know they're unfair. but reassessment is a very unpopular thing. So it, politically it's very difficult. There was one county commissioner who mentioned the possibility of it happening some point in the distant future. She immediately lost her seat for re-election here in Montgomery County. So, but let me finish. So what this bill does is it says the school district cannot appeal assessments, only property owners. However, school districts typically do not appeal residential assessments because it's just not worth it. I mean, if your house is assessed at $115,000, it's really worth $140,000. Usually the school district won't go over that. What they do is they go after businesses where it's assessed for $9 million, but it's really worth $15 million, okay? But if they can't appeal that anymore, that is a huge drain on the school districts. And so the school districts will, in order to make it up to the extent they can, considering there's a referendum provision and all that, will have to raise, the millage will have to raise taxes to, and residents, so it is a shift from business owners to residents in terms of the property tax burden. That is a bill, I think it's Senator Dave Argle's bill. That is a bill that you really, because it sounds like it's conceptually similar to what you're saying.
Well, preemption.
Yeah. Well, no, preemption is, state law covers locals, and this essentially would be a preemption bill because it would say the state would say you cannot appeal a local assessment. But preemption isn't the key part of this. The key part of this is the fact that it is designed to shift that burden. And so, again, not to veer off topic too much, it's why we need public financing. Because
no, it's not designed to shift things.
Well, this bill
It's
is.
designed, the parties that put this bill up for a vote do it for selfish reasons. They want to be reelected.
Well, but the reason business will give more money is because the burden has been shifted off of them. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. So I'm just saying that this is, when I used to call for public financing of campaigns, like that, people say, why should we pay tax dollars to run political campaigns? And I always say, I promise you, you will save far more money than you spend on favors we do to donors. I'll give you an example when I was in the House. I'm not sure if you were there at the time, but there was a bill on the floor one day to exempt car washes from sales tax. And I remember talking to the guy next to me on the floor, and I was like, do we have a car wash crisis in Pennsylvania? Is there a reason for this? And he said, no, that the sponsor of the bill has a big donor who's owns a car wash. And I was like, oh, that's uplifting. Fortunately, it didn't become law. But I'm just saying, we do a lot of things, state, federal, because big donors want us to. And I, sadly, big donors historically are not all that attracted to me. So that gives me an opportunity not to be tempted. But if we were starting a system from scratch, and I said, I have an idea, let's have it so a legislator, if he votes for the chemical industry, will get $25,000 from them. And if he votes against them, not only won't he get the $25,000, his opponent will get it next time. Doesn't that sound like a great idea for a good government? And you'd say you're out of your mind. That's crazy. But that is what our system has evolved into. There are no finance limits in Pennsylvania. A guy or a woman or a business or whatever, a business can write me a check for $1 million to run a state campaign, state rep, state senator, governor. I say again, someone could write me $1 million check to run my cam. And
Is that because of Citizens United?
no, that is not because of Citizens United did different things. Citizens United, by the way, Citizens United did created super PACs and some other things, which I can talk about. But there's been no limits. There are no limits unless we pass them, and we've never passed them. So there are no limits in Pennsylvania on political contributions at all. I mean, someone gave my good friend Tony Williams $5 million to run for governor a few years ago. I don't blame Tony. But that is what we have, and I think that's a horrible system. Citizens United is troubling for a lot of reasons, but I'll tell you something we did recently to try to make it worse. And this is a partisan thing, but all election legislation is partisan in Harrisburg. Citizens United, the theory of Citizens United by its supporters was, yeah, corporations can give unlimited money, but so can unions, so it's fair. Although, let's put aside the fact that corporations give 10 times as much. It's still fair. So we just recently passed a constitutional amendment in the Appropriations Committee going to the floor that says unions cannot use their money for political purposes. Seems to make it less fair, right? There are two exceptions, which is the firefighters and the police who give money to the party that passed the bill. This is not subtle stuff, okay? And so we've got to stop playing with our election system. I mean, it's, to me, it is sacred, and we are being very frivolous with it. I really worry what that means for the future. All right, I'm told a couple more, and I think there's a metal band coming in here after us. So, wait, let me get a different issue. I'm sorry, you were number 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Melanie. I live in King of Prussia. Healthcare is an issue that's very important to me. So are there any legal actions that can be done as a state against the federal government for their deliberate sabotage of the ACA?
Well, they haven't passed it yet. So far it's
ACA.
the Affordable Care Act, but they haven't passed a repeal yet.
No, but they've been
Oh, you mean in terms of
sabotaging cost sharing.
yeah, not giving the subsidies and stuff like that.
Could you kind of repeat the question?
Yeah. The question is, the Affordable Care Act. The Trump administration has indicated they will stop funding the subsidies, which enable people to afford it, and therefore the thing will collapse. The theory being then we can say, look, it collapsed, and so we have to get rid of it. That is a complicated legal question. I imagine there will be litigation over that. I don't know if it will be successful. I'd have to do a lot of research to know that. I do think more broadly on the issue of health care, historically, the theory in politics is once you give someone a benefit, it's very hard to take it away from them. It's easy to deny it in the first place, but it's very hard to take away something you've given. There is an effort on the part of Congress to test that theory. I think this is not an amorphous thing. This is not like, do tax cuts create jobs? I mean, you can argue about that. You'll never really know because jobs will be created or they won't. And there's a million reasons why, and tax cuts might have played a part or might not. But when you cut Medicaid, when you eliminate one of the first things that happens is people get a call and they say, you know what, your mother-in-law at the Shannondale, the home, her Medicaid's been cut. So you're going to have to come pick her up. She's going to live with you now, okay? People don't like getting that call, all right? And when you take away people's health care, I mean, that's different than anything else. I think that's a truly intimate and personal thing. When people can't afford their meds anymore, when people are told you need a liver transplant, but you don't have any way of paying for it, and I want to be clear, just because this is something that's a misconception that is repeated often on television, which is that some people claim there's a federal law that no one's denied health care because you can go to the emergency room. There's a federal law that says if you go to the emergency room, they have to stabilize you. So if you're hit by a bus, they have to stop the bleeding, they have to, whatever it is, stabilize you. But you don't get oncology in the emergency room. You don't get organ transplants or psychiatric treatment or physical therapy or dialysis or a million other treatments in the emergency room, okay? So if you need them, you either get them through and you don't have insurance and you don't have a way of paying for it, you either get them through some charitable situation or you don't get them. And the Harvard study last year said there were 45,000 people in America every year who die because they do not have access to health insurance. And therefore, it's not just the insurance, they do not get the care that they need.
And hospitals have done something on that. Some hospitals have privatized their emergency rooms.
Right. Well, that's a different issue. What I'm saying is, right now, so when you start taking away people's actual health care, I think that is, I mean, just from a political point of view, I think that's crazy. I would not want to run for re-election having done that. I'm just saying, I think that there's a lot you can get away with. I think that taking that away is going to prove to be, because already there's a lot of pushback, but a lot of people aren't involved in that pushback because they don't fully understand yet what's going to happen. But according to the Congressional Budget Office, if 24 million people lose their health care, man, I think you're going to see riots in the streets. That's what I think. But I could be wrong. Well, the opioid, I mean, I had 5 people from the mental health people in my office just yesterday, and they're like, you know, if this, and this is a state program, but they're like, this program gets cut, we don't get our meds. I am out on the street because of my meds. If I don't have my meds, I am dangerous, okay? And I will be institutionalized or I will hurt somebody, one person said to me. I mean, what are we thinking? You know, it is every other country, every other industrialized country in the world has figured out how to deal with this. And you know, there are imperfections in every system, but you know, just I don't know. I don't know. Yes.
My name is Susan Greenwood, and I live right down the street in Wissahickon Valley. And I'm on disability, but I have worked 20 years of my life, and I have a daughter that has cerebral palsy. She's not able to dress herself. She's in diapers. She isn't able to care for herself. She requires a staff person for 30 hours a week, and she goes to a day program for about 30 hours a week. And this is all paid for, plus her medical is paid for through medical assistance. And God forbid something happened to her, we would lose our house, the health insurance that pays for her meds. Since I'm on disability, I took like, you know, about a $15,000 cut on my income. And like we're just.
Well, and you're a perfect example of what I'm saying. I mean, that's a highly personal thing. And the emergency room thing, I want to clear up one other thing. There's buzzwords people use in politics, and I think it's important to recognize them for what they are. One of the buzzwords we hear now is, we're going to make sure everyone has access. Please understand what that means. Everyone here currently has access to a Ferrari. You could go buy a Ferrari anytime you want, all right? And it will be the same thing. The other issue is selling insurance across state lines. You have to understand what that means. Why do they want to do that? Because different states, including Pennsylvania, have mandates. We require coverage of certain things. Well, if you could buy insurance across state lines, some state, Texas, would pass, you know, would not require anything. And so people would, some insurance company would go to Texas and they'd say, we're offering insurance, health insurance. It covers rickets and if you swallow a bumblebee, okay? Those are the 2 things it covers, nothing else. But if you buy it, you have a health insurance policy, all right? And that, you know, that will mean very cheap insurance is available to people. The price of your insurance will come down. It'll be beautiful, tremendous. But, all right? Yeah. But that is a very dangerous thing. I mean, when someone says we're not going to have coverage, but we're going to have access, that is a red flag. And when someone says selling insurance across state lines, I have no problem with selling insurance across state lines. But if you do that, there has to be national standards. There have to be, and that's what Affordable Care Act did. There are certain things you have to cover. And do you remember the things that the original bill that was passed by the House gets rid of? It gets rid of certain services are no longer required. What services? Hospital stays. Okay? I mean, you know, what kind of insurance doesn't cover a hospital stay? So, you know, the fact that something has the word insurance on it, health insurance policy, does not mean it's going to help you if you get sick. So that this is something to be really really follow closely is all I'm suggesting. I know Judy wants to go. There's a lot of hands. I'm sorry. Let's do one more. Someone who wasn't asked a question yet, you, and then we'll have another one soon, and you can ask all your other questions. Yes. All right. I'm sorry.
Being on the Education Committee, is there any light that you can shed on the state's plans to continue funding for the Pennsylvania Governor's School?
Yeah, that was cut completely out of the last budget. It was then rescued at the last minute.
What's the question?
The Pennsylvania Governor's School, I'm sorry, I just don't know. It's a school that. Are you a graduate?
Yes.
Tell me. You explain it better than I can.
The Governor's School is a program which is state-run. It's held at Carnegie Mellon. It takes students in and it gives them an opportunity to.
I can't hear you.
Stand up.
My apologies.
Use the microphone.
I'll do that.
And I'll amplify.
The Pennsylvania Governor's School for the Sciences is a state-run program. It's hosted at Carnegie Mellon University. They take in students across the state with particular emphasis on bringing in young female scientists and scientists of different minorities. It's all junior year students in high school. I was lucky enough to be accepted in 2015. They give them amazing resources, human resources, and lab resources to allow them to do different research. They're educated on different important topics. And these students end up going to a lot of my friends who graduated there. I'm not as smart as them, but they've gone to Harvard and MIT, UPenn, and they're doing really, really important work. And it's a type of challenge and it's a type of resource availability that is offered very, very rarely outside of it. I think it's really important. I think it's a good piece of social infrastructure investment for the state. I was very, very upset to see that it had been cut. We've been fighting funding for quite a while from a couple different people, and I just wanted to know, what the current state plans were to deal with funding for that in the future.
Yeah. Very good. Very, very nice. I support funding for the school, I don't know. That'll be, the budget negotiations are ongoing. The budgets that have been introduced, even passed in one house or another, are sort of meaningless. They're sort of markers. They don't, ultimately the final budget product will look different. I know that a number of my colleagues are strong supporters. I think one has a son that went. So hopefully we'll be able to preserve that funding. We do have like most years, we have a difficult budget. We have a structural deficit. A structural deficit is a deficit that occurs if you buy nothing different and don't change taxes at all. In other words, if you do nothing with revenues and nothing with spending, you still have increasing deficits because certain taxes bring in less. And inflation makes everything cost more, particularly certain things like healthcare inflation, which can rise dramatically. And so how do we fix those? And that's where we started out, where we talked about assuming it away or whatever. At a certain point, we have to get honest and really prioritize what we want to pay for, and we can argue. We have disagreements about what that is, and then how we're going to pay for it, and that's how you do it, but that's not how we've been doing it. We raid these funds that are supposed to be used for other purposes, that we can take the money one time, and we never replenish it, and then there's a lot of budget things we do that, because everything is about this year. We just got to get through this year. There's no real thinking about the future, and what's it going to look like in 10 years. And that's why, selling state assets, we get, $400 million if we sell this asset. Well, that's great. But after 5 years, the $400 million is gone and the asset's gone. So, what does the future look like? So, with that uplifting finish, let me just first of all thank everyone for coming. No. And we didn't get to everyone, so you can email me at leach@pasenate.com. Is that right? Senator Leach at pasenate.com. Senator Leach at pasenate.com. And we will make sure we answer every question. And we will come back. I love doing these. And I don't know why people avoid them. I really, I'm a lonely man seeking human contact. So thank you for coming and have a great night.